Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the webinar. All right, girls, are you ready?
Ready.
We
Mm.
are.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. I am Melissa Haley with Agent Advantage Coaching and Training, and today's webinar is titled TREC Unfiltered: Forms, Realm Portal, and Straight Answers. And today we are joined by TREC Executive Director Chelsea Buckholtz, as well as TREC General Counsel Abby Lee.
Hello.
Oh, thanks so much for being here, ladies. I really, really appreciate you taking your time out of your very, very busy day to be here with us and spend some time and just basically cover all of this great information that all license holders in Texas really need to know about. So, as we get started, and today we are talking about TREC Unfiltered. So, if it's okay with you, ladies, I'm hoping to ask some hard questions and get your real and unfiltered answers. So, if that's all good, we have a lot to cover. So, let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to go ahead and ask the first question. You ladies just take turns and decide who wants to answer. But I'm going to start with basically, we've changed some forms and the why behind it. We had the removal of subagency in 2025, and this fundamentally changed the way real estate is done in Texas, which clearly caused more changes to our TREC forms. Can you talk about the why behind the changes?
Totally. So I'll take this one and thank you again for having us. We're excited to be here. Happy to tackle this one. I think probably to start, the answer to this is it's helpful to provide a little bit of background on why there ever are changes to the contract forms and how that works. As many of you know, our commission promulgated forms, our contract forms, are reviewed, drafted, and updated initially by the Broker Lawyer Committee. It's a committee comprised, as that name suggests, by brokers and lawyers. We sit in a room for many, many hours typically, and come up with potential changes to the contract forms. We're on about a bit of a 2-year cycle, give or take, sometimes a little bit less or more, depending on like legislative changes or other changes in law. That's sort of the process by which forms are changed. They start at that committee level. And the committee's charge really, when they're updating, when they're reviewing, is in part to really minimize controversy between parties. And so there, that committee is constantly monitoring changes in the law, but also what's happening out there in practice, in real life. And a lot of that insight comes from comments, public comments from folks like you, who see an issue and tell us about it. These changes are really kind of born out of that exact same process. So some of you may have heard about a little thing called the NAR lawsuit and subsequent settlement. Um, and I mean, really the massive industry changes that happened as a result, not only to compensation and how that works, but also, to how we represent buyers, how our license holders are representing buyers. And so that was kind of the first step as to why we saw the changes that we did in 2025. I think what those changes did, they greatly changed the industry, but they put a spotlight on consumer protection issues that I think then the legislature picked up on. Importantly, about providing sort of clear guidance to potential buyers when they're entering into these transactions about the obligations owed between them and their license holder. And so I think that's really where that written agreement requirement was born from a consumer protection concern. And so you saw the legislative changes that went into effect this past session and became effective as a result. Really, that legislative change, we saw kind of three changes. You saw an addition of non-representation showing in the Real Estate License Act. You saw language related to written agreements with residential buyers. So you've got that. And then you, of course, have the removal of subagency from the License Act. I do want to clarify, it's not that subagency is eliminated in concept, in legal concept, but it was removed from our statute. And I think practically speaking, the situations where it occurs are more limited now. So it's a huge change, but again, that was the kind of the why, the basis for it. And I mean, it really stemmed from these huge industry changes.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I like that you were talking about the transparency piece, right? That it's so the consumer can understand
Hmm.
what is my obligation when I decide that I want to engage the services of a real estate practitioner. So I think that's smart.
Right, right.
So, you know, I believe you mentioned the NAR settlement, right? And I think before our law changes, the NAR settlement caused NAR to change things for the realtor members, right? And I know there are licensees that are not realtor members. But before we had our law changes, NAR said our members are going to get a signed piece of paper. That's what we're going to do. And it was an NAR rule. But
Yeah,
today, I think it's important for us to make sure people understand this is actually the law of the land, right? And this comes with some level of disciplinary authority, I suppose, from TREC.
hmm.
Can you, either of you, explain the rule a little bit? What maybe, or maybe just enforcement of the rule? I don't know. Speak a little bit more to the difference between it used to be something suggested and recommended and part of the NAR wanted the realtors to do it, but now it affects every license holder, realtor or not, in Texas.
Yeah, and I'm happy to start us off on that. We may tag team a little bit on this, but that's absolutely right. So, this started out as a realtor's, in many ways, sort of a realtor change. And from there, as I mentioned, I think that industry change put a spotlight on this issue for the Texas legislature. And so we saw this law change by the Texas legislature during the past session. So you're right. It's not just a realtor issue or certain brokerages. It's now a license holder requirement. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit about that requirement. There was a provision added to the Real Estate License Act requiring license holders working with prospective buyers of residential property to enter into written agreements with a prospective buyer before showing residential property to that buyer, or if there was no showing happening, presenting an offer to purchase that property on behalf of that buyer. That statute has a list of things that have to be part of that written agreement. Um, I think Sierra, as we speak, may be including a link to a really helpful article, I think, that kind of outlines the requirements there, how that works with the non-representation showing requirement, open houses, etc. But I would say check out that article. It details kind of what needs to be included. And the important thing, I think, as we already discussed, the intent there was to really, again, protect consumers by requiring the use of these agreements that outline the obligations between each party. And so, when that provision was put in the statute, there was another provision that was added, sort of coupled with that, added to a section in our statute in the Real Estate License Act that deals with our ability to take disciplinary action. And what it says is that TREC can take disciplinary action against a license holder for failing to enter into this written agreement as required. I will say I did check with our our director of enforcement recently about this. We haven't received any complaints on this so far, but we do have the authority to take action if there was a violation of that provision.
And I wanted to just pipe up here and say, well, first of all, thank you for having us, Melissa. We're delighted to be here. But also, this is somewhat in the hands of those who can file a complaint, which is anyone, any person who's willing to sign their name to a complaint. It could be a license holder, it could be a consumer, it could be anyone with information that there's been a violation. So as new rules and new statutes come into play, like this one, it takes a little while for us to see complaints on this topic, but it's really an important part of the process to enforce these requirements. So as you know, we don't have any sort of police force out there looking to see who's doing what. We do not audit your documentation of every transaction, but this is something that our license holders have eyes and ears on, and it's important to act on that. I often tell people that if you see a violation, and it could be this new requirement or any other, or something you think might be a violation, I kind of have a three-prong approach. First of all, try to correct it. Correct that action just by coming alongside someone kindly and pointing it out in the same way that you would want something pointed out to you, without accusation, but just assuming the best. If that doesn't work, call their broker and say, hey, I think you need to know that I'm seeing this and it doesn't look quite right. Do you know about this new rule? Of course, everyone knows about this new rule. And then thirdly, if those things don't work, then that's a really good time to file a complaint. And so we encourage that, not for job security on our end, but in order to in order to make this industry in this field as accountable and as good as it possibly can be to protect the consumer, which is what our mission is. Protect the consumer, encourage economic growth. That's the tension.
Yeah, I love your three-prong approach because, I mean, I would rather somebody say to me, hey, did you know that this has been changed? And then let me have an opportunity to correct it instead of the first thing that they ever do is to file a complaint for sure. Because that's just so arduous and to go through the process, and it's nerve-wracking for the agent. I'm sure your enforcement division's like, we got this down, we do it all the time. But when we get one of those notices, we're like, oh my gosh.
That's right. And I should say, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but only 1% of our license holders ever get a complaint filed against them. That shows you kind of how narrow this part of the process of really our existence is in the whole picture of this industry. I would like to see that percentage grow, not because I want to discipline more people, though it kind of sounds like that, but if that number grew, I don't think it would necessarily mean that more people were receiving discipline. It would indicate that there's a culture out there that if something is done wrong, that it is reported. And I think that, more than anything, elevates the professionalism in this industry. But that has to be done within the industry by license holders to report what they see going wrong and to correct each other, to talk to brokers, to do all those things in order to do right by people, essentially.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm all about raising the professionalism for sure. I'm hopeful that they'll just do it when we come alongside them or when we contact their broker. I don't really want your percentage to go up. Oh, all right. Well, let's shift gears just a tiny bit and let's talk about, because we had the changes, because we kind of talked about the history of it and what the law change was. Some of the fallout from that is kind of right back to where we started, which is new forms, right? And so what do agents need to know about using the new forms versus the old forms? Because they became mandatory just a couple of weeks ago on July 1st. And I know there are questions out there about, do I need to redo my seller's disclosure? There's questions. So what do agents need to know as we make this transition?
Sure. Abby, do you want to start this one and then I'll fill in a little?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I mean, to say the least, there were a lot of changes this go around to the contract forms. It's always a little, I know there's always a little bit of uncertainty when you have kind of this amount of change and sort of the number of forms that were changed about, how does that work practically in transactions? So, we've been getting questions of, okay, gosh, I started a contract, June 15th, and now it's, July 1st. Do I have to rewrite it all on a new form? No, no, you don't have to do that. But moving forward, you do. That's the contract form you have to use. Another one we've gotten is on the amendment. So some of the numbering on the amendment change. And so it may not necessarily align. If, for instance, you were using an older contract, and now what you have available to you is the new amendment. Generally, what we say to that is, the parties themselves can make adjustments to forms as necessary. So if a number isn't lining up, that's an adjustment the parties can make. License holders actually can as well. We've got some rule language on that. If I think the language is something like specifically instructed in writing by the principal, and that change is made conspicuous. So I think, practically speaking, there's ways to accommodate that, but I know that's a question folks have. I mean, gosh, the changes I think that we've gotten the most questions about or have heard the most about are the paragraph 12 changes, although not as much as I thought we were going to. And then I think the number one area we're hearing confusion or questions about is the water notice. When is it supposed to be used? Um, how does it work with that contract language in these certain situations that have come up? Um, we've had, a handful, I say handful, I mean, a lot of other changes to the contract forms. We had some changes to the notice paragraph 21. There was sort of a reorganization, a realignment of paragraph 22. There was sort of an expansion of the seller's disclosure notice, which is an interesting one because typically what the commission and I think the broker lawyer committee's stance on that has been is that form models the statute, the statutory form that's found in the property code. And in this case, there was sort of an expansion of that based on our last special purpose sunset review, which requested that our form include some other disclosures. So there's that change. And then you've kind of got a handful of other things that are not less important, but we haven't really heard a lot of questions about trying to define legal holiday in the contract forms. That's kind of been a long-standing question of what does legal holiday mean? Actually creating a new form, the seller's notice to buyer of removal of contingency under addendum for a backup contract. That is the longest title ever, but that's a new change. We had some changes to the HOA addendum. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I know that it was a lot to digest for folks. I always find one of the most helpful things is if you have questions about what has changed, to go back and look at the actual red lines of the contracts. And by that, I mean the contracts that we put out. They're on our website right now. If you go to our contracts page, you'll see on every contract. If it was changed recently, there'll be a red line version of that you can look at. And that will show you what changes are new. Those are going to be in blue, underlined, what changes have been, or what things have been taken out of the form. And I think that's a really good way just to kind of figure out, okay, what do I need? What areas do I need to know about? What's the reason for this change? We've got some information on our website too that provides a little bit more background. But again, we know this is an area where there's been a lot of changes lately. So we get it.
Yeah.
I was gonna just tack onto that. When I speak to folks in person, I ask them, does it seem like we're always making changes to the contracts? And the whole room is always like, yes, it's
Yes.
constant. And And it is true that these are living documents, that they'll always change, that we're never going to be finished with these changes. So if you think about it that way, it feels a little bit less alarming when it happens, because it's just kind of part of the process. But if you can believe it, we really only make changes every 2 years, but we talk about it for so long leading up to those changes. What do you think about these potential changes? Okay, they're happening. Here's the date that they're going to happen. Okay, now what does this mean? That transition period takes up so long that we're kind of always in that state of preparing for it, or doing it, or or finishing kind of the process. But as Abby mentioned, the Broker Lawyer Committee handles these changes to the forms. And I encourage all of you to go to a broker lawyer meeting, or a part of a broker lawyer meeting. They tend to be long, to see the process, because they are very diligent and detail oriented in their consideration of every potential change. And many of those changes happen from comments from license holders. So anybody who thinks there should be a change made can send an email to, is it general.counsel, Abby?
Yeah, that's right.
General.counsel@trec.texas.gov, saying, I think the broker lawyer needs to add lines to this blank. We need more room. To wholly change paragraph 12, because people are really looking for more changes to paragraph 12. Kidding. Or just any ideas that you have or corrections that you would like made. The Broker Lawyer Committee considers each one of those, and changes are made because of those comments. They also have something called the 5% rule, which I think is interesting, and that is if it just applies to about 5% of the time, they're not going to make that change. It needs to be helpful for kind of the broader population, for the majority. So I find those meetings to be very insightful into the process and the reason why our forms are what they are. But I encourage you to participate in that process, and to fill out those comments, and to watch it on our watch those meetings on our website. Look for the next meeting, plan, mark it on your calendar. That type of thing.
I love that. And I love that Abby brought up the red line versions, because I teach a lot of contracts classes, and that's what I use. Even today, now that the forms are available, what I'm teaching from is I'm sharing my screen and I'm showing them the red line versions, because it helps me to show them this is the change and then explain why the change happened. So yeah, I think that's fabulous. It's a great resource. Okay, so as we talk about the contracts, and I'm going to tell y'all before, as I prepared for this webinar today, one of the things that I did is I asked around during classes, I asked around on social media, hey, does anybody have questions? And somebody asked a question about the water notice. As a matter of fact, I get a lot of questions about the water notice.
Same.
But this question, I thought this is a good one to maybe just put out here, especially because they asked specifically in response to, hey, do you have questions for TREC? And so let's ask the question. They said, do lakefront properties need to fill out the water disclosure? And then they said, what if they pump water for the lake for irrigation? So I've got my attorney here, I got my TREC attorney friend here, Miss Abby. Can you answer the question that this person is asking?
Yeah, I can certainly try. So I think that, and I've heard this question too. I've heard a lot of questions, various scenarios about, when do we use this form? When do we not have to provide this form? And so I'm going to generally talk about it, and then I'm going to try to answer this specific question. But I would say, I think most of the time, what I think might be happening, and someone else said this as well, I think what folks may be doing is reading the seller's disclosure notice, or excuse me, the water disclosure notice, not the seller's disclosure notice, but the water disclosure notice first, and not necessarily reading it in context with what the actual contract requires. And I think that may be where some of the confusion is coming in about, oh, I guess I do have to provide this form, or I don't, I think that's probably what my suggestion initially would be, is read what the contract language what it actually says. And I'll walk through that. I gave Sierra a screenshot too, just so she can share that as well as we walk through it. But you start with the premise under our contracts that that form is going to be provided. So you start with the the first step is, okay, this form is going to be provided. Option one is that the buyer has already received the water disclosure. You can check that box. If that's not true, box two says they've not received it, but the seller is going to provide it within a certain amount of time. If they don't, there's some consequences of that. The third option, and this is where I think the questions generally come from, is, okay, seller's not required to provide this at all, is not going to provide it, is not required to provide it, because all of the things in this box three are true. A, B, C, D, and E. So, you provide it unless all of the things in box three are true. And so, we can walk through those and look at those. But, one of those trigger points, if you will, is the seller is not aware of a pond, lake, or water tank on the property. Okay, so a lake adjacent to, next to a property is not the same thing. It's not necessarily on the property. It could be. I mean, it's just going to depend on the circumstances. But if we're talking about, hey, you can see a lake from your house, but it's not really part of your property, that's not what we're getting at here in this box three. So again, I think if you read through, okay, all of these things, A, B, C, D, and E, if all of these things are true, if the seller can say these are all true, then they do not have to provide the water disclosure note or the seller's water disclosure notice. So all of these other questions are almost a little bit red herrings, because really what's relevant for whether you don't have to provide it is those 5 things. One point I will make about 3E, which is the question or the statement that says the property receives water only from the following, and then has a sort of long list of text. One thing I know we're seeing is I think some folks are forgetting to fill out that line. They're checking box 3 and then forgetting to fill out the information that's actually requested in 3E. So I would just point that out. But again, I think that if you read through these things, I think that will answer most of the questions. Another question I've heard folks ask is, okay, all the things are true in 3, A, B, C, and D. All the things are true. So I shouldn't have to provide it, but I'm in a groundwater conservation district, so I should provide it then, right? No, just by virtue of being in a groundwater conservation district doesn't change the obligations in the contract. That's not one of the trigger points. So again, I know I sound like a broken record here, but you got to go back and look at what is it actually saying in 3. If all of those things are true, then the contract says the seller is not required to be providing this to the buyer, even if you're in like a groundwater conservation district, even if you're pumping water from the lake for irrigation. So that's how I would approach those questions. I think this is an area, this is brand new. And I think, and Broker Lawyer Committee just talked about this, and Melissa knows this as well. But we are going to see a lot of questions that are going to come up that are going to be great questions. And I think the committee is going to continue to look at those, tweak the form as needed. I've gotten questions about, what is a pond? What do we mean by water tank? Those are great questions. We might think it's one thing, but folks might think it's another. And so I think we'll see over the next several months some potential tweaks to that language. Of course, anytime, as we all just experienced, anytime we're updating or changing contract forms, it's not a quick process, which I actually think is good. I think we want to be slow and deliberate. So I don't expect to see any changes to the form or the contract, immediately, certainly. But I think we'll start to see Some common themes coming in of, hey, this isn't really clear, or we should tighten up this language a little bit because folks are having confusion or there's conflict between the parties, which is, what we want to avoid.
Yeah. I feel like Chelsea says that all the time. Chelsea, what is the thing that you talk about where you're like, we move slow, but it's on purpose and it's a good thing?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's kind of give people time to weigh in on what the process should look like, because we are government, which means we work for the people, and so we want the people to have the opportunity to weigh in on each decision. Um, Fast-moving government has consequences. Sometimes it's kind
Yeah.
of not how we should be.
Yeah, I agree. And I really like, Abby, that you just pointed them right back to that paragraph, like in the contract for sure. That's kind of what I've been telling people. If all of this
Yeah,
is true, that whole GCD thing and all of that. And I've seen the same contracts where they're not filling in. It comes from the city of wherever, or it comes from the
right.
whatever. We have to disclose it. Um,
I
the
think it's kind of hard because you go to that section 3 almost first. Okay, are all of these things true? If not, then you got to provide it, right? Which
Hmm.
feels a little bit upside down.
Yeah. Well, and the comment that I get sometimes is, okay, I'm the buyer's agent. How do I know what the seller knows?
Hmm.
So I feel like it's on the seller's agent's responsibility to know or to reference what's in there. Does my seller need to fill this out? And then if they do, go ahead and start that process and make a note in the MLS and communicate with the other agent. Hey, we're working on the former. Hey, here's already the former. Whatever that looks like, to communicate between each other for sure.
Yeah. And I think to, Chelsea's point too, I know that that language in particular was something that the committee looked at a lot and I think is still thinking about, is there a way to maybe make that language a little cleaner or change it in a way that it's perhaps a little bit more straightforward for folks. So I think it'll be interesting what we see. And again, to just reiterate, please send in your comments because it's these comments that really shape what these forms look like. And so if you're struggling with a particular aspect, and there's many of you struggling with a particular aspect, I think just like anything, that is reviewed by the committee and heard. So I would just reiterate, send in your comments. We like them. We need to hear them.
I feel like a really great time that highlighted that was in the paragraph 12 in the compensation. When we
Yeah,
first
for sure.
had that, there were so many comments about this doesn't make sense. And then it came back around and I think people are much happier with the current new version. I know they didn't want new
Hmm.
contract forms, but I think they like what we have today, right this minute, more than what we had that we've been having to use for a while because, to Chelsea's point, we move slow, right, to get it all done.
Hmm.
But the comments were a huge part of restructuring that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's a great example. I mean, that truly it is again a perfect example of how, there was that industry change. Here's some language that the committee worked really hard on to come up with. And then we got that public feedback, and I think it's much, improved. I think it's cleaner for a lot of folks. So just that's you're right, a great example of that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and speaking about compensation very quickly, I know you mentioned it earlier that co-op compensation isn't illegal. I'm going to do like illegal in the little air quotes. Because you said it's not that it's gone, but that I can't remember how you worded it. And you said something like, but it's not part of what we do. Will you just circle back to that one more time and make sure that everybody understands? Because in farm and ranch, they're still doing broker to broker compensation, right? And in leases, they're still doing that. So, but not in residential sales. So,
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you just hit that really quick?
Yeah, so there isn't anything in state law that has changed, which is, where we sit, that has changed regarding cooperative compensation, the ability of brokers to compensate each other. There's not been a change in state law with that aspect. And this is where I think it does get a little confusing because there may be changes happening, within an MLS or within, a realtor organization that aren't necessarily state law, but they still, ultimately kind of have the same effect. But from where we sit, there's no change about that. And so, folks can still compensate, brokers can still compensate each other. And, we don't really have a lot of jurisdiction necessarily in that particular area. I know there's a lot of changes that have come and continue to come from, the MLS side, the contract, the actual listing agreement or forms that you're using, which are kind of outside of our scope. But at least from state law, there's not anything that says cooperative compensation is illegal or prohibited or anything like that.
Right, for sure. We don't have that in the listing agreement anymore, which doesn't come from
Hmm.
TREC, like you said.
Right, right,
And the contract has a place right there for people to work amongst themselves between buyers and sellers so that it's not something that has to be done where that wasn't an option before. So I love
right.
that. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for talking about forms with me. But, I think there are people here that really want to hear what you have to say about the Realm Portal because it has been a struggle, right? And not just for us, I mean, for y'all. I can't imagine how much work it has been on your side. So I am going to switch gears and talk about this hot topic of the Realm Portal. From what I see on the agent side and the broker side is they are frustrated with using the system, whether that's changing their license or sponsoring an agent or figuring out how to put their contact information in there. There's a whole lot of trouble. And I know that there are some resources available. So can you discuss this and help us to be able to use the system better and give us some resources that we can use?
Absolutely. Okay, I'll start here, and then Abby, if I say anything wrong, you just interrupt me because it happens all the time now. Um, the Realm Portal has been really a monumental undertaking for the entire agency and for all license holders. And I know that there were some pretty rocky days when we launched the portal. So thank you for your patience and for your perseverance. The rocky days that we saw early on are really behind us in terms of like the intensity that we saw then. It doesn't mean that it's all sunshine and rainbows right now because we're still in the transition phase. We're still kind of making improvements, but also managing the changes that came with a new system. I don't really like changes in my own life. I kind of get pretty set in my ways, and I want to just keep doing what I know how to do. Not an early adopter in technology or anything else. So I feel the pain of people having to learn a new system and not wanting to take the time to do it. I identify with that absolutely. But I want to talk a little bit about where we started, where we are now, where we're headed. Since the December launch, the Realm Portal has really made significant progress from where we were on day one. We were asking questions on day one when it rolled out, like what is working, what's working here, because it seemed like there were a lot of most things were broken. Now we're just making improvements and really the main systems are working. They are not broken. All of our critical system issues are resolved. We continue to work on transitioning some of our data over from the old system to the new system. It's a huge piece of data, like the data that we hold in one database, our old database that we moved over to this new license management system, the Realm Portal, is just a huge amount of information, and there's imperfections in that data. So we'll be kind of cleaning that up all along the way. But As far as you are concerned, things that I want to make sure you're aware of is that we are caught up on our emails. So if you have emailed any of our kind of help emails, Realm Portal, trec.texas.gov, or I think we have a licensing one, we have information, there's a few places where questions come in. And for a while, we were very, very slow in responding to those emails. We are completely caught up now. So if you email us, you should hear back from us within a couple of days. Our call hold times, at the very worst, we were, I heard nightmare stories of people waiting on hold for 2 hours. Of course, a lot of stories of people waiting on hold and then the calls getting dropped. It was very messy. Some of that was completely outside of our control in that we use a phone system that is kind of provided to us by another state agency, and we were just at max capacity with that phone system, which was causing calls to be dropped. We worked with the governor's office and with executive leadership to make improvements there, but it was a messy start. I can tell you that yesterday was the first day that we had a call hold time average that was under 1 minute since December. And that's a huge thing to celebrate. All of July, we have had single-digit call hold average times. That's a huge improvement over the month before. So these nightmare, I think our highest average hold time at its worst was, can't remember what it was, but in my head, it's about 40 minutes or so. That's when the 2-hour hold times were coming into play, because on average, if it was 40 minutes, then there's some longer, some shorter. So that was the hard season. We are back to much more manageable call hold times. So if you're looking to reach out to TREC, you should be able to do that with a phone call, just the way you always have, and you might wait on hold for a few minutes, but it should be very managed. Similarly, if you have a question in email, you should be able to get a response in a timely way. Our application processing time, which I learned a lot in this rollout. I don't think I knew that for every person seeking to get a license, there is a brokerage waiting on them to make money, right? That's kind of a business model. So you're not just helping one person, you're helping the applicant and also the business they seek to be a part of. Yeah. And so getting that application processing down helps not just one person, but that whole business model. We're turning around sales agent applications now really within a week, often shorter. We're trying to get that turnaround time. We're trying to beat what we did in the old system and get that application processing to just a couple of days. And so I think we'll see that over the course of the next several months. But if there's an applicant who has been waiting for longer than about a week, we need to hear about it, because there might be something going wrong there. It might be that our emails to them are going to spam. That has happened regularly. For all license holders, I encourage you for this purpose to put the email address where we email official emails from in your contacts, so that these things don't get filtered out. We have a kind of a no reply at trec.texas.gov, something like that. But when you get always, if you're waiting for an email from TREC and you're not seeing it, look in those filters to see if it's going elsewhere, and then drag that to your friendly senders folder, or however that works. But so for applicants, if they're waiting for long periods of time, it's because we're communicating with them and they're not receiving it. There's a glitch in the system that we need to know about. It could be that there's criminal history that we've opened a case on and that we're needing to process. So those are kind of the reasons for the delays now. We continue to enhance the usability and the efficiency of this new system. Everyday tasks that agents and brokers can complete in the Realm portal include their renewals, all applications, CE tracking, sponsorship requests, and complaints. Those are kind of the biggies. The number one issue for license holders that I hear from, just, hey, I'm having trouble, can you please help, tends to be not seeing a renewal button, knowing that someone is in their renewal window, but they're not seeing a way to renew. And almost always, the reason that that's happening is that someone has created an account in the Realm portal, but they have not pinned their license to that account. And you really cannot manage your license unless you create an account in Realm and then attach the license you're trying to manage to that account. And the reason for that is that having an account is just like having kind of an envelope, and you need to put your license inside those envelopes. So we have information on our website on how to do that. You can go to the Realm Portal Help Star in the top right corner of our website. Kind of far right, there's a star. It says Realm Portal Help. You can pull that menu down, and there's all sorts of help for license holders, applicants, people wanting to file a complaint. Also, TREC.texas.gov/lowercase LMS, License Management System, has all sorts of updates and FAQs that could be helpful for you there. Also, in both those places, we have a tool that if you're trying to pin your account, you open an account and you pin your license to it. In order to pin, you need a PIN number. Some people didn't get that PIN number that we emailed back in December. And if you didn't get that PIN number, there's a tool on our website to look that up. Let's see, what else? We've got a few more webinars that we will do. One is specifically for the complaint process. So we've gotten a lot of questions about how to respond to a complaint. And so we will provide, we have some information on our website now. If you need more help on that, then we'll do a webinar there. We're also looking to do one for local boards. We have done a few webinars. Those have been recorded and are available on our website, as are a lot of helpful videos that many people have found helpful. I hope all of you do as well. I have offered my email out to the world. I did that early this year, kind of out of desperation, to make sure that if someone needed help, we had a mechanism to get that help. You are always welcome to email me still. Though I'll tell you that because our call hold times are better now and our email is being responded to more quickly, your best bet is to go straight to the expert, which is those two mechanisms. Mostly what I do is connect you to someone who can solve your issue specifically. But I'll give you my email just in case there's something that has gone unanswered, or if you're displeased with something, or if you just want to start with me, that I'm happy to do that. It's chelsea.buckholtz@trec.texas.gov. My name is hard to spell, so I have a feeling that Sierra might put my email address in the chat just so you have it. But I'm happy to hear from you. But I started that just because I wanted to make sure you knew that we were working very hard to get folks the help that they needed. Now I think that's a whole lot more accessible. One more thing I wanted to say, and that is, I'm kind of thinking about changes to our system or kind of where we are today with kind of two things in mind. Change is hard, and we're not going to change our system to be what the old one looks like. That's not our goal. Our goal is to make it better. And so some of the frustration, I think, is just around the process of learning. And I see that frustration waning a little bit as people learn this process. I've also seen kind of informal ambassadors in the field, as there's a few people in each brokerage who have figured it all out. They're helping other people in their brokerage. And I think that is incredibly helpful. And I encourage you to be those people, to help those in your brokerage, or to, point them to us for help. So there's that category that's just going to take a while. It's going to take at least a renewal cycle or two to kind of get everybody comfortable with these changes. There's another piece of that is what we rolled out was a day one product. We knew that, the life of the product, we would continue to make changes. In our first round of changes, after making sure critical systems were working. This first round of changes will be to make it more intuitive and to enhance its usability. And so we are receiving feedback from folks on what is terrible and what needs fixing, and we will begin to kind of start those fixes in the next couple of months. We've really transitioned out of this implementation phase and into a maintenance and kind of systemic improvements. So it's not static. There will be continued changes happening. If you have a glaring issue you want us to consider, you send it to me. I'd be happy to hear. I get an occasional grumpy email that is, I don't know why you had to change this. Our old system worked just fine. But I'll tell you that there are things that our old system could not do that many of our license holders have been asking. One example is showing an affiliation for an associate broker. We could not collect that information in our old system and produce it back to you on our website. It's just not possible given kind of the structure of our old system. Now we have that ability to make that change and to produce that information. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but really our motivation for making this change was to allow to have a system that allows you to do more self-service and to have more information and to make improvements that our license holder community has been asking.
I love that. Well, I know it was rocky, and I know that you have been an amazing leader as far as just email me or, listening and giving responses back. So thank you for doing that, because it was hard. It was hard for you, it was hard for your staff, and it was hard for all of us out in the field.
It was really hard for everybody, and we had a little bit of control in that we decided to do this. All of our license holders were along for the ride, and I appreciate all that it has taken to come along.
Yeah. Well, and I have found, I don't think you mentioned it, but I have found helpful this Vimeo video channel that y'all have, where there's all kinds of videos about do this in Realm. And I'm like, oh, let me just watch the video. I have that. And I have a person at my brokerage, like you said, that's like this informal ambassador. And every time I need something, I'm like, hey, can you help me with this? So
amazing. You need one of those.
You do need one of those. Everybody needs one of those, right? So you mentioned about the broker associate thing, and I knew that was coming. I knew that was a thing that was part of the Realm portal, right? And that we couldn't do it before. But I feel like there was also something about that whole contact information, because as a real estate broker, sometimes I have to call other people's brokers. Like we talked about earlier today in enforcement, we're going to try that 3-pronged approach, and I'm going to talk to the agent first, agent to agent. And if that doesn't work, it's broker to broker, and I'm going to call that broker. And I used to be able to go on the TREC website and say, I need to know who somebody's broker is and what their phone number is so I can call them. And then there was a state change at the legislative level that said that stuff can't be here anymore, because if I'm getting it right, because we didn't have in our TREC system the ability to know if it was your home address or your work address, or your home phone number or your work phone number. And the state said we can't have people's private home address and home phone number out on the internet, right? And so is that getting fixed in Realm? Is that something I'm going to be able to do soon? And what's going on with the broker associate thing? Can I look that up today? I don't really know if those have been changed, or if that was all part of it, or when that's coming. How is that going?
Yes, that's such a great question. And it's a very slow process. Yes, we are collecting that information. So first, for broker associate, as we receive that information in the Realm portal, we are able to display it on the license holder search tool. And there is not very much information that we have yet on it, meaning that not many have included that information in what they've provided in the Realm portal. So when you go to the license holder search, you test it and see, go to someone who a brokerage who has associate brokers, look that brokerage up, see what's listed. And it might have that information. If it has not been provided to us yet, it will not be included. But over about a renewal cycle, so over a 2-year period, we will collect that information, and over time it will be more holistic. But
Okay.
right now, some of it is there and some of it is not. That's also true for the business contact information, which is what we call, Melissa, it's exactly like you said. The legislature said you couldn't share personal information on the website. And if we could not distinguish between personal and business information, you have to assume that it's personal. And so we asked for a legislative change to expressly allow us to collect this business contact information. We received that and are now collecting that in the Realm portal. And in the circumstances where that has been given to us through the Realm portal, you can see it on the license holder lookup. And over time, it will be a more complete look than it is today. It's so incremental that when I talked to our IT department yesterday, I said, can you please send me examples of where we can see it on the license holder search? Because you can't find it everywhere. And he was able to do a screenshot saying, okay, I looked up this brokerage. Look, here's broker associates. Okay, I looked up this license holder. Here's their business contact information. Those are people who provided in the system. So over the course of a renewal cycle, once everybody's logged into Realm, everybody, shares that information, then you'll see it. But as of today, it's nowhere near complete, but you'll begin to see it in time. It's there.
So what I think I hear, let me just make sure that this is clear, that if I take the time to watch the training video and I go to the Realm portal and I proactively add, this is my work info, this is my home info, and I'm a broker associate, right? If that's a true statement, I can add all of those things. If I proactively go do it, it'll show up today. But if I don't proactively go do it, whenever my license renewal comes up, the system's not going to let me renew my license without adding that information. Is that kind of the process?
Abby is nodding her head yes.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the idea, is that, as Chelsea mentioned, because the touch points, the times when we touch a license are really at, okay, when you first apply for a license and then you renew, the challenge for us is how do we get everyone to do this? And so realistically, what we're looking at is, okay, well, it is a little bit of a slower process because we'll catch everyone eventually and get this information. But because that touch point, the next touch point is really at renewal, that's why it's a little bit of a slower process.
That makes sense. Okay. Well, I hope anybody watching today decides to be proactive and go put it in there, because I really sometimes use especially that business contact information. And I know a lot of people did. That was a really big deal. When all of that went away, a lot of people that I talked to out in the field were like, oh, this stinks. And then you're trying to Google somebody and they don't want to be found because they're not in production. Realtors that are in production and real estate licensees that are in production, their phone number is everywhere. But the broker who doesn't want to be bothered, their contact information sometimes is hard to find. And that's who we normally need. And, then there's that whole IABS form that might or might not be where it belongs on their website. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there where I'm trying to track them down. So it'll be so nice if somebody watches this today and proactively adds it.
Absolutely.
That's my hope. All right. Well, we are like running out of time. So I was going to ask, and I don't know if we can do it really quick or not, but we had some quick questions from some of our licensees about what, or maybe you guys can stay another couple of minutes. I don't know. Why aren't we more proactive in enforcement? And question number 2, why are wholesalers around and they're allowed to do business and they don't have to have a license? Can those be fast questions with answers, or are we going to run really, really long?
Yeah, no, I'll be super short on enforcement, and then Abby, do you want to take wholesaling just so we do it
sure.
fast? Sure. Okay, so on enforcement, complaints are an important part of TREC's ability to protect consumers, of course. Complaints bring specific concerns to the agency's attention, and when a complaint's filed, TREC has an obligation to review it, determine whether we have jurisdiction, authority to handle the issue, and then we investigate that when appropriate. Sometimes we can resolve it without opening an investigation. So why isn't there proactive enforcement? We are inherently reactive in enforcement, and that's because that's how the legislature designed us to be. That's really the short answer, is that we don't have a police force. And really the way that we are proactive is in how we educate, how we get information out there to people so that they are good at their jobs and they don't require discipline. That's the proactivity. The response is, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, then we enforce through discipline.
Makes sense. Okay, Abby, wholesalers.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like the pressure is on because when anyone says be short, I am always very long. But I mean, the real answer to that is state law says that certain activities are brokerage activity and certain activities aren't. And in particular with wholesaling, what our License Act says is that if you are one of these wholesalers, typically it's like you've got a seller, a buyer. That buyer turns around and tries to sell their interest in that contract to another buyer. That's the typical scenario you might see. That as long as you are disclosing what you are selling, the nature of that interest to the seller and the potential buyer in that scenario, it's not considered brokerage activity. So that's what state law says. That's really the shortest answer I can provide, because this is what state law says. Now, if you fail to make that disclosure, what the law says is that then it does turn into brokerage activity and you would need a license to do it. And it can be considered unlicensed practice in that scenario. But again, it's what the law provides.
Got it. Okay. I know we're out of time. I do. But I do want to thank you guys very much for being here. And I also want to give a quick shout out to everybody that gave feedback and questions. And we had so much good information, and a partial list of some of the people that put some comments in that maybe came up today is Casey Jorgensen, Sonia Kennedy, Kristen Correa, Lacey Ogburn, Amy Hansen, Eric Hale. These folks and anybody else, if you gave our comments, thank you for doing that, because it's important to get plugged in to what we're doing so that we can then turn around and get that information back out. And that actually brings me to one more thing I do want to say before we close. I know we're 2 minutes late. Is if you're a license holder and you want to be connected, you're concerned about what's going on and you want to know how to make a difference, you have the ability to get involved. And Chelsea, I know we have some advisory committees that are currently accepting applications. Can you just let us know? I think there's 2 or 3. Who's
Yes.
Who's accepting help?
Broker Responsibility Advisory Committee is seeking 2 public members and 1 broker member position. So public member means people who are not licensed.
Okay.
ESAC, Education Standards Advisory Committee, is seeking to fill 2 instructor or like school owner positions and then 4 real estate license holder positions. So they've got 6 open.
That's a lot.
And then the inspectors are accepting applications for 1 public member seat, so not a license holder. Sometimes those are hard to find, and so if you have anybody who would be good at that, please point them to these applications. We've got that posted on our website, and we would welcome a good turnout on applicants.
I love that. And also, like Abby mentioned in the beginning, just suit up and show up and come to one of the committee meetings in person, on Zoom, whatever, because that helps you get involved too. And send your comments.
Absolutely.
Send the feedback. Awesome. Well, again, ladies, I'm sorry I kept us late. I know your time is so valuable. So I appreciate you taking your time from your very busy schedule to share your knowledge with everybody. I very much appreciate it. And I especially thank you for staying an extra 4 minutes for everybody today to make sure that we got everything covered. So, my hope is that we can do this again at some point in the future and keep plugging along and getting everybody up to speed with all of the things that are happening at TREC. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa.
You.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. You ladies have a good day.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.